when you buy an index fund, you can actually be concentrated more so than you realize and more so than you may want to be in a select few number of companies. When you buy the S&P 500 index, it is a market weight index. That means that the largest companies in the index make up the biggest percentage of the index. I'm going to dig a little deeper, look under the hood of the S&P 500 index, and shed some light on what you actually own when you buy an index fund like the S&P 500. So let's look at what it means when you own a market weight index. Here we have Apple, the #1 company in the S&P 500 by size. It makes up 3.7% of the index. Right next to it we have TripAdvisor, number 499 by size in the S&P 500 index. And instead of being its equal weight, equal share, it makes up 0.02% of the index. These concentrations tend to get bigger over time. So because it's a market weight index, you have the biggest companies that make up the biggest percentage of the index. If Apple continues to grow, the stock price continues to grow bigger and bigger, Apple is going to become bigger and bigger and bigger as a percentage of the index. The concentration of individual companies or sectors in the S&P 500 isn't really a problem until you have a downturn either in a particular sector or a company or in the market or the economy as a whole. Okay, so we've got tech stocks in the late 90s, early 2000s. We've got bank stocks right before the financial crisis. These sectors and industries and the stocks that made up the bigger portion of the S&P 500 index at the time, these were all bloated and overvalued compared to their historical norms. And that's why the S&P 500 or other market weight index funds like it tend to fall harder, crash harder when things get ugly in a recession or a downturn. And that's exactly what we want to avoid. The largest 3 stocks in the S&P 500 index, just 3 companies, make up 10% of the index. That's crazy. 3 companies out of 500 account for 10% of the performance, 10% of the risk. This is why these index funds are not as diversified as you think. 3 companies. Next, we have the largest 10 stocks make up 22% of the index. So just 10 companies out of 500 are 22% of the index overall. And then we have the largest 50%, the largest 50 stocks, just 10% of the overall index account for 50% of the weight, 50% of the gains, 50% of the losses, 50% of the risk. All right, so let's look at these top 10 stocks in the index that account for 22% of the S&P. So what do you notice here that's really interesting? Well, first of all, 4 out of the top 5 are tech companies. And I would argue Amazon's like a quasi-tech as well, but technically it's a consumer discretionary. So we have tech companies that make up a huge percentage of the index. There is an ebb and a flow to investing, and that these companies that are very bloated right now that make up the top 10 stocks in the index may not necessarily stay that way forever. So we've got 4 tech companies in the top 10, all of which are in the top 5. We've got 3 financials, 1 consumer discretionary, 1 healthcare, and 1 energy, and a bunch of sectors that go unrepresented in the top 10. This is why you're not as diversified as you think when you buy an S&P 500 index fund. If you take anything away from this today, don't take away that indexing is bad. It certainly has its place in the broader context of a portfolio, depending on your goals and what you're trying to achieve. So I'm not saying that index is bad, but please don't assume that just by indexing or buying an index fund that it's safe and diversified, because it's not. It's much more concentrated than you're probably giving it credit for, and it's much more concentrated than everybody out there who's preaching the index gospel is talking about. If you have questions about your specific situation, you want to know about the index funds that you own maybe, and want to know a little bit more about what's under the hood of those funds, we offer a free 15-minute consultation over the phone. No pressure, no sales pitch. We'll answer your questions. Just click on the calendar link below to have access to our calendar and schedule your consultation today. Thank you for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel so you get updates every time we post a new video. We don't want that. We don't want anyone throwing up because of the stocks that they own. That's not good.